So I wanted to bring up this, which you guys and most people who are going to watch this video are familiar with this screen, with this idea of the subconscious mind. And I wanted to talk a little bit about it and add some more details to this idea of the conscious and the subconscious mind. So while you guys look at that, I'm going to read a quote from my book. Well, it's not a quote from, it's a quote that's in my book from Charles D. Larson, his book called Your Forces and How to Use Them. And here's his quote: that the two phases of the mind are related can be well illustrated by comparing the conscious mind with a sponge and the subconscious with the water permeating the sponge. So I'm going to read that again. The two phases of the mind are related can be well illustrated by comparing the conscious mind with a sponge and the subconscious with a water permeating the sponge. We know that every fiber of the sponge is in touch with the water, and in the same manner, every fiber or every part of the conscious mind, as well as every atom in the personality, is in touch with the subconscious and completely filled through and through with the life and force of the subconscious. We know that every fiber of the sponge is in touch with the water, and in the same manner, every part of the conscious mind, as well as every atom in the personality, is in touch with the subconscious and completely filled through and through with the life and the force of the subconscious. So I think that's a great illustration. Like we talk about this 90-10 split and what a big deal that is. That quote that I just read illustrates how important the subconscious mind is and what a role it plays for us. It is in touch with every aspect of our life and the way we show up. And so these are some of the details we go over on the weekend in terms of the 90-10 split. Everything you've ever experienced is there. It's topographical. It's not a process. It's a process, not a place. And it's the mind where the mind deals with guilt and fear, which we deny or project. So that's sort of the background of what I wanted to talk about. I'm going to stop it. I can't. There we go. Okay, so that said, one of the bullet points on that slide about the subconscious mind was about guilt and fear and denial and projection. And the idea that I wanted to put out tonight was this idea that that subconscious mind piece is also illustrated in the idea of the inner child versus the adult. In other words, the inner child is the emotional part of ourselves. This is one of the things we've talked about before, emotional part of myself, and the adult is the intellectual part of myself. Now, the problem is that as a child, our intellectual processing is limited. It's not fully developed. So when we don't understand something and we still have feelings about it, I believe that it goes into the subconscious mind. So in other words, when I can't understand what's happening, but I feel things about it, it goes into the subconscious mind. And generally speaking, when I can't understand it, and that's where a lot of fear comes from. As a child, we have this experience of not understanding what's necessarily happening for us or what's going on around us, but we have feelings about it. And again, that stuff ends up going into our subconscious mind and showing up as fear because of the misunderstanding, okay? And then we don't have adults that necessarily are able to explain things to us, okay? I was thinking about the fact that as a kid, one of the things I used to do when there was a party or a gathering of people, I would frequently have to leave the room. Not frequently, but I would have to leave the room and go be by myself at some point. And it didn't seem to happen for the other kids. They would stay at the party, they would stay in the room with all the people, and they would continue to interact, and I would need to be by myself for a while, which is fine. If I had a child who was doing that, I would tell them, like, it's perfectly normal. That's just what you need to do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I guarantee you, for me, at that point in my life, I did not have an adult who was noticing that or explaining it to me. I guarantee you, I did not understand. I had a lack of understanding of why that was happening for me. I'm sure I judged myself for it as being different or wrong because the other kids weren't doing it. And again, if I had an adult there to say, Chris, no, this is perfectly normal and you're fine, there's nothing wrong with what you're doing. But again, I didn't understand it. I judged myself for it, I'm sure. And all that went into my subconscious mind in terms of fear, misunderstanding, guilt, you know, what's wrong with me. A lot of those judgments, a lot of those beliefs ended up in my subconscious mind. And so as the quote at the beginning of this video talked about, this subconscious mind permeates all aspects of my personhood. Okay. And so a lot of that, I've heard some people say a lot of that gets developed before the age of 7 years old. And that makes sense to me, that a lot of emotional stuff happened to us without intellectual understanding before we were 7 years old. And a lot of that stuff that we didn't understand ended up in our subconscious mind. So that inner child is driving a lot of the fear and guilt that's going on for us, and the denial and projection. And again, as our iceberg slide showed, denial and projection is one of the primary methods that we use to deal with this guilt and fear that we have. And the reason we deny and project it is because we didn't have an understanding of it as a kid. And that's the method we came up with. When we don't understand something, we can't figure out what's happening, we deny it and project it. So, and the projection oftentimes shows up as being outer directed. So in other words, I have feelings, I can't make sense of those feelings, or I have behaviors that I can't make sense of. And since I can't make sense of it or understand it for myself, I become outer directed and blame something outside of me for the way I'm showing up. So I think that's one of the ways that projection gets created, because again, as a child, I have emotional stuff that I don't understand, ends up in my subconscious mind. And instead of understanding my responsibility for what's going on, I'm just going to use the word responsibility for what's going on. Since I can't make that connection, I become outer directed and blame things outside of myself for how I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing, because that's the only way for me to make sense of it. Does that make sense as a concept?
Yes.
Neville, you look sort of chagrined there. That makes sense or no?
No. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is, since the subconscious is so pervasive and so involved in all aspects of our personhood, we've got to figure out how to get in touch with it. So one of the ways that we get in touch with it is becoming the observer. Because what happens is, when we're the judge, when you can think about this, we talked about the observer last time we did a video a couple weeks ago. When you're observing, you're finding things interesting and you want to know more about it, and you're not necessarily judging it. And so, and why that's valuable, because when you judge things, you create more fear and more guilt and more misunderstanding in the subconscious mind. So you're filling the subconscious mind. When you instead decide to be the observer, and you're not judging what's going on, and you're just observing and noticing, being curious about it, then you can examine it more than when you're judging it. You want to project it and deny it because it brings up more guilt and fear. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the ways that we get in touch with this subconscious mind that again is pervasive and touches all aspects of our personhood is by becoming the observer instead of the judge, not judging. Okay. So that's one way we get in touch with this. Another way we get in touch with it is just simple understanding, whether it's our iceberg slide and understanding the subconscious and conscious mind, whether it's understanding this idea that my emotional self has experiences, and again, the adult is there, but there's a split here. And one of the ways I experience this split with people is they'll say that they understand something, but the way they're behaving doesn't match up with their understanding. So I'll hear them say to me, yeah, I totally get that. And I understand what you're saying, and I understand what I'm doing, but I seem to still be making this other choice, or I still feel upset about it, even though I have the understanding. And what that tells me is the adult can justify all kinds of things and explain things away with the intellectual mind, but when emotions are involved and the inner child is involved, explanation and understanding is not enough. I have to get in touch with the emotions, the feelings that are involved in this situation. And so when people tell me, you know, I get it, but I can see that they're still upset and bothered, that means to me there's a split there between the inner child and the adult, between the emotional self, the intellectual self. And so that creates more guilt and more fear, which fuels the subconscious even more. So to have an understanding of this idea, the fact that there's a split going on, is valuable. So the next piece is, we got to be okay with our emotional experience. Whatever that emotional experience is, okay with the emotional experience. So that means accepting the fact that I'm feeling sad, that I'm feeling angry, that I'm feeling jealous, that I'm feeling envious, that I'm feeling whatever it is that I'm feeling, being okay with that. And one of the things that we do in Out of the Matrix is sometimes people think that because we're teaching them to be inner directed, that means you should never be upset. And that's not what we're saying. We're saying we're humans, we're going to continue to be upset. We're actually saying, be okay with being emotional or upset about something, because that's going to lead you to understanding what's happening for yourself on this side of the line and in your subconscious mind, and then you can release it. So one of the big things is becoming the observer, not judging, understanding the subconscious mind, and then also being okay with your emotional state with respect to whatever is happening. And the other piece that happens when you do this is when you're okay with the emotional self and how it's being expressed, you're telling your inner child, I see your inner child, that you're okay with it. So the inner child needs to feel protected by the adult and accepted by the adult. And so when I am willing to accept my feelings in the moment about whatever is going on, what I'm saying to my inner child is, your feelings are okay. It's okay for you to express your feelings. It's okay that you have these feelings. And if you think about this, if you have a young child in your care and they get upset or cry, you're not going to, hopefully you're not, some people might do this, but hopefully you're not going to tell them, don't have those feelings. It's not okay to have those feelings. You're going to say, I understand that you're upset and I get it, and it's okay to cry and be upset, all those kind of things. So the way you might approach a youngster in your life now is the way you want to sort of approach this emotional self of yours. And so when you do this, you're starting to unlock the subconscious mind, okay? When you're accepting of your emotion, again, I'm going to say it again, when you're accepting of your emotional self, your emotional state of being in any particular moment, you're telling your inner child that I'm okay with you. I'm okay with you. You're okay having these emotions. And again, that starts to open up the subconscious mind, because I think that's where the emotional self mostly lives, is here. And I think that's because there's been a lack of acceptance probably about the emotions that the child has been feeling. And so, especially as adults, one of the things that we'll do is we will justify things and say, well, I don't need to feel that way. I shouldn't feel that way. I shouldn't be upset. And the fact of the matter is, I am. And when I say I shouldn't feel that way, I'm judging and putting down my inner child. I'm telling him or her that it's not okay to feel that way. And they're going to shut down more, and I'm creating more fear, more guilt, more judgment that's going to end up in my subconscious mind. So that's a lot of information. Does that make sense?
Good.
Yes, but one of the hardest things that I've noticed is when I catch myself, when I'm observing myself in a situation, and it's a situation maybe that I haven't been my best at, I immediately judge myself. I mean, that's where I go, like, immediately.
Yeah.
It's really hard not to judge yourself. That's for me, that's the hardest thing.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's one of the key pieces, is to catch yourself with that and say. So I'm sure though, Mary Lou, that you spend some time catching yourself in that judgment place and saying, no, that's not what I want to do right now. Do you do that for yourself?
Yes, I know I'm not supposed to judge I know it's not a good thing to judge myself.
Yeah.
That's really hard to let go of that judgment.
Yeah, gotcha. And so, but do you find yourself in moments when you say, like, I don't want to do that to myself, that it works? You're able to undo that judgment?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that. I think eventually maybe I do, but
Yeah.
not right away.
Does this connect at all? Does this connect at all that that's your adult judging your child?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that. But one thing that this is all brought up was on the plane. I was watching a movie, The Life of Mr. Rogers.
Oh yeah.
And I'd never seen him on TV. I don't know, somehow I missed that era. But he was so great that his main message to the child was that they're okay just the way they are.
Yeah.
And I heard that over and over again, him telling the kids they were just fine, and he liked them just the way they were.
Yeah.
And it was so beautiful to hear that.
And what a simple concept. And of course, kids felt very comfortable around him, right? And so, yeah. So again, you guys can spend some time thinking about this and sort of noodle on the idea that, you know, this subconscious mind is where your emotional self is kept. And this is my personal experience. Like, this totally jives with my experience for me, that you know, a lot of times I think it's not okay for me to be upset is because I see myself in an adult body and think of myself as an adult, that I shouldn't be bothered, I shouldn't be upset, I shouldn't be sad, I shouldn't cry, I shouldn't be jealous. You know, I should be able, and then the out of the matrix teaching, sometimes the adult can grab onto that and say, yeah, I can justify a lot of things, I can explain a lot of things away and make myself think that I'm not upset. But it's really important that we do this piece of acknowledging that I am in the state of being that I'm in, and that's okay. It's okay it's okay however I'm feeling about whatever is happening. And then what that does is it unlocks the cause. So we would say the cause is the belief that I have about myself. So if I feel like, you know, for me, mine is unlovable. Mine is unlovable, and so we're, you know, out of the matrix, we talk a lot about whatever your false belief is, that's the cause of your upset. And again, when you get okay with the feelings and the fact that you're having an emotional upset, then you can get in touch with the cause of that emotional upset, which is the belief. When I'm in denial or not okay with having that emotion, then I can't get in touch with the belief. And this is why in Out of the Matrix, we talk a lot about connecting the emotion to the belief. In other words, we help people identify what their false belief is, and then we ask them what emotion do they experience around that false belief. When you fill out the worksheets, we say, you know, what emotion do you have associated with this? And what we want people to do is probably when they're getting angry regularly, that it's associated, and they can connect that to the belief. The next time they get angry, they can start to say to themselves, is this possibly about my false belief? Okay. But again, I can't do that if I'm not okay with being angry. I got to get okay with having the upset. And the problem is we deny the upset. We justify it, we talk ourselves out of it, we convince ourselves that we're not upset or that we shouldn't be upset or it's not okay to be upset. And when we deny that upset, then we have blocked off the ability to get in touch with the belief. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Any questions about it or any conceptual struggles with it?
I'm glad you recorded this one because I definitely have to listen to it again.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, because it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking at my notes. Yeah, so that's primarily what I wanted to get into tonight is again, I want to go back. I'll go back and review real quick. In that quote that I read, he talked about the fact that the subconscious mind over here, your subconscious mind permeates all aspects of the self. And so it's incredibly important that we get in touch with this subconscious mind because it affects so much of our lives. And in Out of the Matrix, we do a lot of that, and we talk about this belief piece. One of the things that we don't talk about, and we might need to add a section or at least a discussion about this, is this inner child and adult split. Because the adult can so frequently take over the situation, justify and intellectualize all kinds of stuff about it so that we don't have to have the feelings, okay? And then the other piece that goes on, you guys will recall, you'll recall us discussing this sometimes in the weekend, sometimes in follow-up classes. But again, conscious mind, subconscious mind, and there's a line of pain in between those. And so when the conscious mind starts to lean into the pain that it has about these false beliefs, it gets uncomfortable and goes away from it. And this is where the adult will step in and justify or deny the feelings, because we don't want to feel the pain. So that again, the conscious mind leans into whatever it is that's painful, and then the adult can step in and say, oh, but I don't have to feel that way. I took Out of the Matrix. I'm inner-directed. I can make a choice not to feel that. And that's true on some instances, and it can be valuable, but we don't want to do it to the point where we're denying this process and we're denying what's actually happening to us. So again, we got to be careful that, because in my experience or my understanding, when the adult steps in and does that, it's denying and really minimizing the inner child instead of being okay with what's going on. The adult is minimizing our emotional selves when we do that. Okay, and the piece that you're sort of talking about is this idea that it becomes difficult because we're asking you to step through this pain and experience the pain and feel the emotions of it, and we don't like to do that, generally speaking. Again, we're we're wired to avoid pain. So we want to, we start to feel that pain and we come up with a reason for me not to have to feel it. And that's, again, where the adult steps in, justifies, intellectualizes reasons why I took out of the matrix. I don't have to go through this pain. I can just choose not to. And again, that's valuable sometimes, but we have to be careful when we're in denial. And that's why in the weekends, we can watch the emotions come up for people, right? When we're talking about these concepts and talking about these ideas, and we have people write up their grievance worksheets. When they do those grievance worksheets, they really get in touch with the actual feelings that they're having around it, and they tend to come up in the weekend, okay? And so then, and that gives them a clue of what's going on. Yeah, so that's that. Questions about that? Oh, so I was sort of reviewing, yeah. What else to know about this? Yeah, so we'll do a quick review. I'm gonna wipe this out. Quick review of what we just said. And I totally get that it's hard to like hold all of this in your mind. That's why it's important to review it even 2 or 3 times on the video. But again, the subconscious mind permeates all aspects of the self. And one of the aspects of the self is the inner child, okay? And the adult sometimes can intellectualize or justify not having feelings, justifies no feelings. I mean, I'm an adult, there's no reason for me to be sad, I'm not gonna be sad. And then, of course, the other piece that can happen here is as the adult does that, I find ways to avoid, whether that's alcohol, drugs, sex, shopping, the list goes on and on and on and on. But when I say I don't want to, when the adult justifies not having the feelings, then the feelings are still there. I got to find ways to avoid it. And then I start to use different ways to do that, different ways to avoid it. Overworking, right? Working too much, whatever it is that I do to avoid, okay? And so that's another reason it's valuable to go through this process of being the observer, not judging myself for being upset, not judging the inner child for being upset, understand what's happening, be okay with the emotional self, is because when I get okay with the emotional self, I can deal with what's going on with me emotionally, and then I don't have to do all these avoidance behaviors, okay? And of course, these avoidance behaviors are pervasive in our society, and they're pervasive in our society because our subconscious mind pervades all aspects of ourselves, and most of us do not understand the way our subconscious mind works. So I'm going to say that again. Our emotional self, we have to be okay with it, because when we're okay with that, then we don't have to use avoidance techniques. And the reason we're using so many avoidance techniques in our world is because our subconscious mind permeates everything and we don't understand it. And so it gets uncomfortable and we decide to avoid our feelings rather than being okay with the fact that we have them. And part of the problem for folks is, I might tell someone, be okay with being upset, but if they don't know the rest of the story, they don't understand the subconscious piece, they don't understand the false belief, then being okay with being upset doesn't really help. They need the rest of this process, okay? So that they can undo what they've done, which is to deny the inner child. Does that make sense? Again, a lot of information there. I'm just saying it slightly differently. Was that confusing you guys, or did it make sense?
I'm gonna have to watch the video too. I'm like, okay, my head's spinning.
Me too.
Yeah, that's why I keep saying it 2 or 3 different times. So watch the video again, and hopefully people who do watch it will just, you can sort of rewind and listen to things again. But again, the subconscious mind pervades all of us, our entire personality, every aspect of ourselves. So we want to get in touch with that. One of the ways we get in touch with that is being the observer, not the judge, okay? Because when we're judging, we're creating more fear and guilt, which is in our subconscious mind. We want to understand what's happening. We want to be okay with the emotional self. And when we're okay with the emotional self, we're telling the inner child we're okay with you, okay? And that way the inner child and the emotional self can come to the surface and be dealt with. When we're in denial of our feelings, in denial of our feelings and our inner child, it tends to seem to disappear. And what's happening is the feelings and the inner child are being housed in our subconscious mind because we're not allowing ourselves to consciously experience it. Okay. So I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again in different ways, but that's still my valuable. So you guys have questions about it? Does it raise anything up for you in terms of what's going on for you? For me, one of the things I've recently experienced, I'll give you sort of my personal experience with this is unlovable is the false belief. And as I identified myself as unlovable as a child, I felt guilty about that. I felt like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me because I'm unlovable? And I can look back and I can see the evidence in my childhood, the way I was treated, that's the message I was getting. And, you know, I can look back now and again, the adult could step in and say, well, yeah, but that was just my parents and my brothers projecting their unlovable onto me. And I can have that intellectual understanding today as an adult. But when I was a kid, I did not understand that. All I knew is I felt guilty and sad, and in the end, shameful about myself because of what I was experiencing, because I did not understand all of this information, and I didn't understand projection and that that's what my parents and my family were doing. I just knew that this is how I felt about myself, and this is how I understood myself right here, okay? And that all went into my subconscious mind because I didn't understand what was wrong with me, that I was unlovable, okay? And I could see that play out in my life. And I'm very clear that my dis-ease, which can show up in lots of different forms, my dis-ease is associated with this experience. If I tell myself I'm unlovable enough, feel enough shame about it, that starts to affect me physically, okay? So we have unlovable, which I'll abbreviate as UNL. We have shame associated with that. This is for me personally, of course. And then I'm sick from that. That's sort of what I'm working with. And what I'm working on in my meditations is working on seeing myself as lovable, and seeing myself as free. That's what I'm doing, is the opposite of shame, and seeing myself as healthy. Okay. But I'm aware that over the last week or so, I'm crying a lot. Like there's a lot of things coming up for me that I'm crying about. I had a discussion with one of my students today about her issues. Well, I won't get into her issues, but about some stuff going on for her. And it's a very similar conversation that I've had with lots of students over my 20 some odd years of teaching. So it was nothing really unusual about the conversation, but I found myself tearing up and starting to cry. And she was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm okay." And I sort of gave her a brief explanation, but I'm finding that there's a lot of sadness that's coming up for me, okay? And last night I was helping my son write a paper for school, and there was this, he's going to St. Ed's, and there was this concept that we were working on, and one of the things it said is that it's a shame that when the stock market goes down 2 points, it's a huge story on the news, but when a homeless person dies, no one pays attention. And no one cares. And so the idea was, you know, that's a shame and it's not honoring human dignity. I had a hard time reading that to my son last night because I got so tearful and started to cry. So what I think is happening is I think this process that I'm talking about is working for me. The sadness, the crying is coming up for me. So I made an appointment with my therapist to sort of talk about this process and what's going on for me, about what's coming up, because I think it's associated with this idea of lovable, free, and healthy versus unlovable, shame, and sick. But you can sort of see in this process how when that was going on for me as a child, I didn't understand it. It all went into my subconscious and it permeates every aspect of my being. And then as an adult, I can look at it and say, well, I totally understand why that happened to me as a kid, and it really wasn't about me. But it's still living in my subconscious mind. And I have to get comfortable with that and get used to it and get it to come to the conscious surface. And I'm trying to do that by being okay with my sadness and the crying and stuff that's coming up for me. Is that a worthy example to explain this?
That's an amazing example.
Okay. So of course, oh, excuse me, that's the hope My hope is that as people get in touch with their false beliefs, they can do this sort of a process for themselves. But I'm hoping that example for me helped illustrate what I was talking about earlier. So questions, comments, does it bring anything up for you guys? Small group, obviously. I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. And I might edit the video a little bit, take out a few things here and there, but most of it I think is relevant.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to stop recording.